And start the recording.
The recording going?
We are live.
All right. Good evening and welcome to the August 3rd, 2003. Good evening and welcome to the December 14th, 2003 meeting of the Athens-Clarke County Planning Commission. For those of you viewing the meeting remotely, you'll find a meeting agenda on the Planning Department website at accgov.com/planning. For those of you attending in person, on the table by the door, you will find a sign-in sheet and copies of tonight's agenda. For each agenda item, we will begin with a report from ACC planning staff. This is followed by a presentation by the applicant, not to exceed 10 minutes. I will just point out tonight, we're dealing with text amendments. So the planning staff will be running much of this meeting. We'll then hear from members of the public. 3 minutes are allowed for any member of the public who wishes to address the commission. When addressing the commission, please provide your name, address, and the nature of your interest in the project, and direct your comments to the planning commission and not to the applicants. The audience is instructed to refrain from applauding or jeering the speakers. Exhibits may be displayed by the applicants or members of the public at the podium. Written correspondence received by noon yesterday has been forwarded to the commission and is part of the public record. Any additional written materials to be placed into the record must be read during public comment and within the 3-minute time limit. For all speakers, please pay attention to the timing device near the projector screen. This device will display a yellow warning light when you have 30 seconds left, and then a red light when your time is up. After the public comment period, the applicant or their representative may request a 2-minute response. After that, the applicant will take their seat in the audience. At this point, the public portion for this agenda item is closed, and the Planning Commission will proceed to discuss the item. We will receive no additional public or applicant comments unless requested by a commissioner. Finally, please note that the microphones in this room are sensitive and that the meeting is being broadcast live. Please turn off or silence your cell phones.
I think that may have been a COVID version of the introductory statement. So.
I think that's right. Okay, so we will go ahead and begin with the introduction of staff reports and all of the documents submitted to the Planning Commission at this meeting into the official record. Could I get a motion? Second. Motion by Sarah, second by Sarah with an H. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed. Next item is approval of the November 2nd, 2023 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
She took it.
Second. Joey, motion, Sarah without the H, second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And the last order of general business is May Court's review and public comment. Any report
I have
from?
no report this evening.
Okay. Is anyone in the audience here to talk about May Courts? Always unlikely. Okay, then we'll move on to new business. We had a fairly extensive discussion during our agenda setting meeting, and the upshot of that is that we decided to move the discussion of short-term vacation rentals to the end of the agenda instead of the beginning of the agenda. I hope that doesn't inconvenience the people in the audience too much. We will try to be really efficient with the first two items. We do have some planning commissioners who, out of an abundance of caution, need to recuse themselves on the discussion of short-term vacation rentals. Our attorneys are looking into whether they need to be out of this discussion or not. And we are just trying to be very by the book by asking these members to abstain from the discussion on short-term vacation rentals. So we do need their input on the additional items. So we'll start with the second text amendment on the agenda, which is Administrative Hearings Officer. So we'll hear from that first.
All right, thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, this is it's a two-part amendment that you have in your packet. It involves section 1-5-1, which is technically not something that you will be voting on, but it's going to run with an amendment to Title 9-4, which is our procedures section of the zoning ordinance that talks about the appeal procedures for each type of zoning action that we have for appeals of staff permits. Those appeals, as currently written, would go to the hearings board. Generally, those are things that that as planning director, I would make a decision on where there's the denial of a permit or the interpretation of a definition that an applicant may or may not agree with my interpretation on. Those are generally what they are. And so safety net was that we take this to the hearings board and we explain the situation and allow them an opportunity to either agree with staff or to agree with the applicant. But those are very simple examples. It could get much deeper, and in cases where there may be litigation involved, it can also land first in front of, you know, a 7-member citizen appointed group that's really not, you know, in a position, or it's certainly, in our opinion, is probably not the best way to proceed with those types of decisions. And so, given the fact that the appeal procedures for other departments throughout the government are almost all, if not all, to the administrative hearing officer, we felt like it would be prudent to make that change in zoning ordinance 2. And so what that language does is it replaces hearings board in terms of where the appeals go with the administrative hearing officer, and sets up some provisions for that as well. A lot of those provisions appear in Title I that you also have in front of you. There will be an additional section put into 9.4 before we bring this back for you to vote on in January that references those provisions in Title I, just to make sure we're in compliance with state zoning procedure laws and other things. So this was something that we've been in discussion with our attorney's office about. We're very comfortable with this change going to the AHO. And if you've got any questions or concerns, we'd love to hear them tonight. If not, we will bring that back for a vote in January.
And I should have said before Brad started talking, this is for comments only tonight. So in fact, everything on our agenda is for comments only tonight. So we're not taking any votes except the ones we just took to approve the minutes and staff reports and that kind of thing. Does anybody have any? Oh, I'm sorry. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this amendment change? Basically moving the oversight of staff decisions to the administrative hearings officer rather than the hearings board. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Okay, well, we'll come behind the rail. Any questions, discussion? Sarah?
I was looking at the page 3 of the 2-page document, of the 3-page document. The item F speaks to after the hearing, the administrative hearing officer shall issue a written decision on the appeal. And I guess my thought when I read that was, do we need to, is there anything elsewhere in the code that sort of enforces a time frame by which that has to be done, or does it need to be explicit in here? In other words, like language that would prevent an administrative hearings officer from holding up the process, sort of providing protection to the appellant.
I'm gonna let
So, yeah, so a couple of things on that. You know, we discussed this a little bit in the agenda setting meeting. Our administrative hearing officer also happens to be our municipal court judge. And so it's usually a she, we do have an assistant judge who's a he, but she.
Did you say it has to be or it happens to be?
It happens to be,
okay.
Yeah. That's the way we've traditionally done it in Athens-Clarke County. And so usually she will follow kind of the processes that she uses in municipal court in terms of timing and things like that. My experience with these types of appeals is that usually there's not really a time frame that's set on the judge or the hearing officer. But it does happen sometimes in the law. But there are some procedural mechanisms that somebody could use if a judge or a hearing officer was not being diligent in terms of getting out decisions or opinions in a timely fashion.
A different way they can address if they feel like things are being unfairly delayed.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And particularly if you have lawyers on both sides, which sometimes happens with these disputed issues, you'll have lawyers that may pursue some remedies if they felt like it was necessary. My personal experience has always been doing administrative litigation, civil litigation, is that most judges and that most administrative law judges, administrative hearing officers do their absolute best to get their written opinions and their written decisions out as soon as they possibly can. I haven't run into a lot of problems with that ever.
Sounds good. I think as long as there is a mechanism by which somebody, if that's kind of provided for else.
Decision, because what happens is that, as you'll notice further on in subsection F, that is appealable up to Superior Court after that. So, it's always good for the hearing officer to be able to issue a really well-reasoned, well-written decision. If it does get up to Superior Court, the Superior Court judge understands what he or she is looking at and has a good record to work off of.
Is it fair to say this is a multi-step process? So you appeal it, I'm not even talking about that, but then you have the appeal hearing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then that officer can ask for more information or briefs to be prepared before rendering a decision. And then receiving those, they could then also ask to perfect the record further, right? And then.
That's correct. So under this process, the hearing officer has a lot of authority. So, it being a judge, judges are sometimes used to getting briefs on matters. And so my experience with the administrative hearing officer in the past has been that sometimes the administrative hearing officer will ask for pre-hearing briefs. They may say, hey, we want you to kind of firm the issues up for us by issuing a pre-hearing brief. Or alternatively, after the hearing is done, they may say, we would like, I'd like some post-hearing briefing on these certain items just to make sure I understand the parties' positions in the law in this area. And if the hearing officer feels for some reason that the record is not complete or that the record needs to be supplemented, the hearing officer does have the capacity to remand the matter back to the planning department to add whatever supplementation needs to go into the record.
So it's not like night court.
It's not like night court. That's right.
Ooh, you just dated yourself, Bruce. Or, no, that's back on now, right? Yeah.
But I am dating myself.
I have a comment. Always looking at this, I always have a problem taking things out of a group of people that were appointed, did lots of discussion to put it to one person. This administrative hearing officer, which is now currently a judge, could that person ever be someone that's appointed by the mayor, or would that be everybody something different? Because you would like to think people's opinions are going to be very fair and straight, but sometimes when people get put in office, and even judges, if they're elected or appointed, how are they in that office? So I like keeping it to a group of people who have an opportunity to discuss, then put it to someone who might be put in a position by someone else that of a higher power.
Sure. So a couple of things on that. If you look at the section 1-5-1, the part that the mayor and commission would not vote on. I mean, so to clarify Brad's point earlier, we've included the section 1-5-1 and the proposed section 1-5-2, just so you all are aware of what the procedure is going to be, what it's going to look like when it goes up to mayor and commission. This isn't before this body for both, but it says the administrative hearing officer shall be nominated by the mayor and confirmed or rejected by the commission. And so in the past practice has always been to have the municipal court judge and the administrative hearing officer be the same person. It doesn't necessarily have to be so. And we do have assistant judges who can serve in that capacity. Let's say that there was some conflict that the administrative hearing officer had and he or she felt like they don't need to hear that case. Something like that. There are mechanisms to.
So we could approve this and then next month or in 2 months, the mayor and commission could decide, oh, let's put so-and-so there. He could nominate somebody and then they could vote on and approve it.
That's correct. Yes, the mayor and commission select the hearing officer, the administrative hearing officer.
I'm sorry, anyone else want to comment? I guess I just wanted to put this in a little bit of context. So these are decisions made by the planning department. So these are staff decisions. And what is supposed to happen is really a review of the process as opposed to a review of the merits of, whether Brad calculated floor area ratio correctly or not. So as long as planning staff follow their own rules and the appellant also, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that these aren't, my understanding is that these aren't the kinds of decisions that affect like broad swaths of the community. It's more making sure that the process is working correctly, which does affect everybody, but.
Sure. So you probably want me to cover that one too. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not trying to talk over you guys.
Please.
I looked at him the whole time.
So what I would say is if you actually look at the, let's see here, subsection E of the proposed 1-5-2, it kind of talks about the standards of review that the administrative hearing officer would abide by. So this is an appeal from a staff decision. So it's review, the administrative review is basically based upon the record that goes up to the administrative hearing officer from the planning staff. So it'll basically be their file on the matter. And so if it's some sort of factual determination, the administrative hearing officer is just supposed to look at the record and make sure that there's something in the record that supports the planning staff decision. In other words, okay, I'm looking at this record, or does it? Yeah, alternatively. If for some reason it's something that would be a legal determination, sometimes that may be an interpretation of a particular part of the code or something of that nature. That would be what lawyers call a de novo review, which means he or she would review it all over again. And it would be kind of like the first time that it's reviewed.
Which is why it would be good to have someone with legal background.
That's right. And that's one of the reasons that there's been some discussion about sending it to the administrative hearing officer, because sometimes it does come down to a lot of issues of statutory interpretation and things like that. And it's helpful to have somebody to have a lawyer who's trained in those things to be able to look at it.
I mean, I'm really sympathetic to Joey's, the philosophy behind what Joey's saying. I assume the hearings board has an attorney with them when they sit. But I also, having been in the role of, having to switch hats to the quasi judicial, I know it's complicated and confusing sometimes to know where those lines are drawn. So
That's true.
to me, I feel like this is something I can support next month, but some description.
You're right.
Well, Alex, you go first.
So John, going along with what Joey brought up first, because I kind of tend to worry about what if it's not this crowd today and somebody else comes in. And so if there's an issue with the person in that role, currently a municipal court judge, and the mayor commission wants to change that, can they do that within a 30-day period or a 90? How quickly can they act if they really do feel that it's time to change up?
The municipal court judge serves at the pleasure of the mayor and commission.
But can that person stay as a judge and they just pick someone else?
I'm sorry, you're saying for the administrative hearing officer?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood. So,
It seems like legally that could be the deal if they're just going with the municipal court judge, because that just makes sense.
Sure. So, I mean,
It also says the administrative hearing officer is confirmed by the mayor and commission, right?
by the mayor and commission. So,
Same standard.
exactly. I think it would be basically the same thing, same standard. And also remember too, that if for some reason we do have basically backup judges and backup administrative hearing officers. Actually, if y'all remember Jim Davis, who used to sit in this chair, he's one of the assistant judges now. And so, you know, it's entirely plausible that the administrative hearing officer could say, hey, I don't need to hear this. I'm going to give it to one of the assistant administrative hearing officers. You know, if a party really did have a deep concern about it for whatever reason, you know, lawyers do sometimes file motions to recuse. That's always, it's not a fun process if you're a lawyer, but you can do it if you think that the person, the tribunal is somehow biased against you.
Right. But the mayor and commission can take speedy action
Sure.
to say, we don't want you to be in this position anymore.
We're gonna
You be a
appoint,
judge, but we're just moving that and giving it to Mr. Davis.
we're gonna appoint this person as the administrative hearing officer. Judge, you still keep being judge, but here's the new administrative hearing officer.
I don't know if it helps or not, but in the 23 years that I've been director, I think we've only taken 4 or 5 of these to the hearings board. They happen very infrequently. It's not something that happens a lot, but
That's a telling number. Good job on writing code for us, guys. Yeah, so.
I just want to clarify and make sure I understood that. So I'm sort of thinking, I think you brought this up in agenda setting, Alice, that this is what an administrative hearing officer does is different than like the way that we're limited as a planning commission when we're seeing hearings board appeals, where we can't really base it on anything other than finding like procedural irregularities or something like that. You're saying that in the AHO situation, they have the option to hearing it in that sort of de novo way where they can kind of reevaluate it, or so either way, it can be procedural or maybe is it by nature procedural because of what it is?
Well, it could be. I mean, I suppose if that was raised as an issue to the administrative hearing officer, and so and you think of it a little bit like an appellate court for a minute. And so what would happen is there's a record that's put together by planning staff. They, you know, basically they're going to say, here's our file on this, whatever this issue is. And they would tender a certified copy into the record of the administrative hearing officer. And then the parties would have an opportunity to give oral argument on that and explain why they're, based upon that record, why their position is the better position. Now, if it's a factual issue, there's this thing called the any evidence standard that Georgia uses for administrative appeals. And it basically says if there's something in the record that supports the administrative body that made that decision, in this place is the planning department, but it could be a lot of different things. If there's something in the record that supports their decision, then you affirm. If it's a legal determination, then it would be de novo, but it would still be based upon that record. We would still be arguing based upon the record, but it would just be saying, this is why we think, for instance, as a matter of interpretation of the code, this is why we think our interpretation of the code is correct, or why we think our interpretation of the code is a better interpretation. And the opposing side would of course argue that too, and the judge would issue a written decision on that, or AHO would issue a written decision on that.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments? Well, then we will move on to the next item on our business with the growth concept map discussion. Again, with staff presentation. Mark. Being of the growth concept map.
Okay, well, thank you, planning commissioners. Got a little bit of, this has gotten the gas station bathroom key treatment here. Got just a little bit of background that you guys all saw before we got into this process, just to refresh you, and then we'll get into what we kind of heard and some of our process. And then what I really want to get onto is the map. So all the planning commissioners should have a color copy of the map in front of them, just in case when we get into this, it gets a little out of focus. So remember back to where we started this process, we formed a few guiding conditions, those being the natural environment, the built environment, and planning policies and documents. We are kind of ranging these from hard to change and rigid to a little bit more firm, and then onto the malleable side, a scale of how we would kind of work through this process. We showed you this map about creating a land use budget, going through our community engagement process, coming up with some scenarios, which is what our map tonight will get into a little bit. And just wanted to refresh you a little bit in case anyone forgot about kind of where we're currently at by type. This is not a zoning map. This is based much more closely with the land-based classification system. So we've just broke it down into a few major categories there. You can see the percentages within each category, and that's by area of each of those use types. So all along, we were talking about how the two down at the bottom, making up just a little over 11% of our land mass, are where a lot of our cases that come before you all are decided, and where a lot of our growth and any of our intensity, and particularly where our people in a multifamily arrangement are ending up located in. So I also will say that there's quite a bit of text on here. We put a lot on here because we think this presentation will get published. So I'm going to go through a little bit kind of quickly here, but there'll be a bunch to go back to, and I'd be happy to send this out to the planning commissioners after the meeting this evening. So we had 5 different type of engagement activities. Sit-down meetings were, I believe, 16 of those we had. So we had a creative engagement aspect at the beginning of those. Thank you to all the planning commissioners that came and engaged and helped out with that. We're looking into some fresh thinking. Big part of that process is actually to listen and hear what everyone else has to say. And a lot of the outcomes of that were about the values expressed by the participants. We then got into the presentation with some questions and answers. This was a little bit more data-driven about the infrastructure, a little bit more of the standard zoning operation stuff you see at meetings through that part. We got in, I believe, 6 neighborhood walks. We got out to see and engage the built form, get some of that experience, demonstrated where throughout town that some of the arrangements we're talking about that might relieve some growth pressure are already in existence, whether people knew about them or not. And then a lot of that data pointed out some interesting facts and opinions about the rights of way and how they impact the built form. We had 2 bus tours. We got to see a little bit of a comprehensive view of the east side and the west side, a lot of connections between those uses. We were able to go out and table at a few events. We got some more general comments at those. We're able to kind of meet people where they're at. And those were more a bit about the some of the highlights and some of the issues. And then Stephen specifically went out to 2 of our schools and was able to engage some of the youth and bring along some of the hopefully future planners, and if nothing else, citizens and residents of Athens-Clarke County as they go forward. So we got a little over 2,000 comments in response there. We categorized those into 9 different categories. And you'll see the 2 big ones here are the rights of way in blue at about 30% of our comments. And then our open space, green space, landscaping, kind of general green stuff in the green there, which was 23%. We had quite a few comments that were sort of didn't fall into these as easily. Stuff about, hey, check out this thing in this city that we really like, or, just sort of general comments. So those are a little bit more uncategorized. You can kind of see the breakdown there of whether they're tabling, whether it was the exercise. We did want to mention that some of this data, while we're giving you some points, some of the things such as the exercise, the creative exercise, we got a lot of stuff about open space and childhood and being outside. We think that's definitely a big component of where people are interested in. We definitely are factoring that into some of our scenarios, but we understand that some of that data was sort of driven in some directions by some of the prompts we gave people. So just being transparent about that in general. We took some of the big ones here and some of the highlights. So function and form were 2 of our first big ones. Mixed use showed up over and over and over again. In terms of form, people talked a lot about needs for design standards, that human scale, big component of when we were out doing the walks, limits on parking and corridors, especially in the front yard. Talked a lot about setbacks and some of that space that's used and how that can contain the feel and sort of bring safety to a neighborhood or a corridor. Blending those neighborhoods came up quite a bit. Structured parking actually came up quite a bit. Continuing to have that downtown core, very unique place. It has its own activities, own reasons for being down there, very unique. And then also a lot about clustering and nodal development, which is what you can see on the map. In a residential sense, we got a lot of conversation about that proper scale. Again, kind of going back to that human scale concept. Residential variety came up quite a bit. A lot of people ask questions about ADUs, needs for senior housing, needs for more choices in housing and density. And of course, affordability came up over and over again. The final few that we had for commercial was about how do we address that commercial vacancy. A lot of comments about positive things in local restaurants, small businesses that we see in some of our neighborhood business districts. Landscaping and open space being a big one. It wasn't just trees. Trees was in there multiple times, in addition to trees being in there quite a few times by itself. So I wanted to reflect that here. Shared and activated green space and open space and parks. A lot of connection to water. A lot of those childhood memories and those ideal cities have that connection to water. Parks connected to people, whether that's through trails or through neighborhood parks. Rural preservation actually came up quite a bit in this discussion, something we definitely have out on the edges of town and we want to kind of respect and make sure we're being mindful of. And then a lot about ag, growing food, fishing, surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, came up quite a bit. So we kind of lumped those in there together. As institutions, maybe being centerpieces of neighborhoods, a lot of discussion about medical, especially on the east side. And then our rights of way being a big one. Safety was a huge part of this. We had a lot of people kind of open their eyes out on the walks. A lot of people felt safe doing certain things, but sometimes not safe. I think we've all been out on the roadways and realized that all roadways could use a little bit of enhancement in that regard. And so that's kind of speaking to some potential design solutions and some other needs. Traffic came up. Traffic always comes up before this board and everything in the community. Bike multimodal infrastructure, the fact that we have quite a bit of topography throughout Athens-Clarke County. Walkability and connections came up continually. Need for more transit, and then the potential for regional or even further trains. So we took a bit of an approach that's very popular in the urbanism circles these days. Congress Renew Urbanism is very big on it. This has been an idea that's kind of a response to growth that we had for quite a few decades that was based around cars. So you're going to see this in the map as well. We kind of cut off at about T5, calling downtown T5, and you all should have a printout of this as well if that helps out a little bit. This is from the wonderful city of Cincinnati, but you can see these in all types of places. And frankly, we need to go out and do our research and make one for Athens-Clarke County. T5 and then T4 would be the yellow, mostly inside the loop. It gets a little bit outside the loop on just a little bit on the east side of town there. So we're still talking about dense in town. We're talking about, closer to a grid network, street system. And then as we get into T4, T3, they want clustering. T3 to us is a little bit more of that suburban style we have. Lots out on the east side to the north, and then going out west beyond the loop. T2, we don't exactly have a whole lot of. You could probably consider some of the very rural residential places T2. We kind of lumped T2 and T1 in there together. But this whole idea of that we're looking for this form a little bit more. We took that with what we currently have, which are the kind of the underlying colors on the map there. And then we want to kind of expand on that. We want to bring some of those concepts as we're going forward. So that was in terms of our transects. One of the other big things we looked at was our corridors. So two big things we're showing here in our corridors that are highlighted on the map are growth and redesign. Growth being that expansion of that intensity around the corridor. We're not talking about expanding roadways here or adding lanes. In fact, in a lot of occasions, you can see from the image here, we were talking about, the potential for road diets and, right sizing our transportation networks so that they speak to those uses on the side of them. A lot of what you all do and what we do in the planning office is the use right outside of the right of way. Our friends downstairs deal with the right of way a lot. But that interaction is becoming a lot bigger topic, and how those pieces speak to each other really depend on how that development goes, how that feel is when you're in the community, how people walk, how people use transportation. So just being a little bit mindful of growth and redesign being two aspects. When we're talking about growth, we're talking about the surrounding land uses. So we came up with 5 big guiding principles, and we'd kind of like to focus on these. We can pull back to these when we're done. focusing on redevelopment resources on corridors and nodes. That's what you see all over your map. Almost all of the indications on your map are corridors and nodes that have a lot of potential for transformation and growth. Working with minimal to no sewer service expansion. You've seen this throughout, and you can still see the red boundary that we have on the map there. If we're talking about expanding sewer, we're talking about expanding expenses for the government. Very expensive expansion. You all saw that last month with a planning case, or 2 months ago, pardon me. So we need to look at ways how we're going to grow that capacity within the existing network. We want to minimize travel distance, so localizing trips, bringing the people and all the aspects that they deal with on a regular basis closer together, commercial, institutional amenities, residents near jobs, students closer or on campuses, people closer to commerce and activity centers, reduce crossing the loop if possible by bringing those localized trips, and then adding street connections to distribute that traffic, expand that grid network if possible. The 4 and 5 here are planning for incremental growth throughout all neighborhoods. So while we have the nodes and the corridors, we also want to recognize that every aspect of Athens, probably outside of the green belt, the rural areas, which we haven't really addressed much, all of those areas inside of that need to plan for some of that incremental growth. They need to expect it. They need to accept that. That's how we're going to be able to grow and maintain without bankrupting the city. And so to that last point, environmentally and fiscally sustainable growth. So that speaks to the infrastructure, that speaks to how we incorporate all those comments on green spaces and open space. So here's the map before you all tonight. This is what we came up with. I think you'll probably recognize a lot of these spots, and I'll go through them really quickly here as we zoom in a little on the next few slides. Just wanted to orient you. We look at maps all day long, so it looks normal to us, but I've got a cut up kind of zoomed in version. So that's why the map's before you all. To the west, so the nodes, the red node is the mall. So the mall in downtown, which is in the north central one, are our 2 T5 nodes, major urban corridor nodes. As we step down in node intensity to the T4, you go to the oranges. So the far one to the top would be Oak Grove. Coming in Jefferson Road, Prince, there is where Homewood Hills and Prince Avenue meet the loop. And then going south from there down Hawthorne is Alps Beechwood. So those are our T4 nodes we have to the west.
Do you have a laser pointer by any chance?
Oh yeah, there we go. I'm sorry. Okay. So Mall, T5 in red, Oak Grove, Homewood Hills, Prince in the Loop, Alps Beechwood are our T4 nodes. So we're talking, pretty tight networks in those areas. Those would mirror a little bit closer to our in-town, which is this beige color. On your maps, if you're looking at your personal maps, it's that beige yellow color that's mostly inside. That's what we're considering our current kind of existing T4-esque neighborhood. Then we step down to T3. It's a little bit more of a suburban style. So we've got Winslow Park. We've got Athens West and Athens Crossing, I believe, which is where the Academy Sports is. Athens West is where Big Lots right by Aldi. We've got an area here that really doesn't have a node currently. So we're right across the river on West Broad. This would be where that at home, there's the D12 design, there's a QT on the one side, Old Epps Bridge comes out of there. As we step in town, we've got Normaltown being a little bit smaller of a neighborhood business district. We've got 5 points. And then down here at the bottom, we've got Macon Highway out by the loop by South Millage there. So those are the nodes in the west that we're talking about. The corridors we're talking about here are Atlanta Highway getting a lot of attention. Potential for change on Jennings Mill. This is the one that we're talking about redesign here, but not growth. Until we get the sewer buttoned up on McNutt's Creek, we would like to see that change, but we really can't get the residential growth out there. We have going out Epps Bridge, going out from West Broad. We have Hancock and Prince getting upgrades. We've got Millage going across there, Baxter, and then in town, we've got West Broad. So those are the corridors we're looking at for the western portion. The central and north portion is, you see a little bit of overlap over here, so I'll leave those alone. But back to the T5, so starting at our most intensity, we're talking downtown. I think we all recognize that and understand that aspect pretty well. The T4s we have are potential out where General Time development is going on up Newton Bridge Road. And then we have out where Kroger is going out at 78 and 29. That's where some of our most recent infrastructure has gone into, some of our largest potential has gone into. And if we can change that from being that suburban style development to a potential, northeastern Athens business district, that's kind of what we're looking at there. Into the T3s, we're looking at the Piggly Wiggly Shopping Center going up North Ave and, a little bit of development along North Avenue. We've got the Triangle Plaza in East Athens there. Corridor wise, we're looking at 29 going out. We're looking at North Avenue going out from downtown to the Loop, getting a lot of attention, Oconee Street, and then that gets into Lexington Avenue down here. We have a few unique things that are sort of unknowns to us where sewer expansion is possible without some lift stations from what we're being told, or that some of the capacity to tie into there is much more ripe than to just extend out to areas where there isn't some other capacity. So again, that's that area out by Kroger. That basin is shown here with a blue hatch. The second one that's a little less controversial is going out the Firefly Trail towards Winterville. I forgot to mention we're talking about, the use of the Firefly Trail as well as an alternative corridor. So that's a basin. We've got, I believe, Turkey Creek up here, Shoal Creek down here, if you see that on your map. And then the one that we would love to address that we know is elephant in the room is going up Sandy Creek. So if there's expansion possibility to go up 441 into the Sandy Creek Basin, this special district right here would be the current proposed amphitheater. That's the former reservoir just on the north side of 441. And then one other I forgot is a potential special district along the river here on the eastern side of downtown. Lastly, we've got just a few left here kind of going south and east of town. Big one being Kroger, Publix, Barnett Shoals, and touching College Station all the way down to Research, hoping for a lot of potential out of that district. We've got the Willowwood Shopping Center, which is where the Ollie's and the Goodwill are at the intersection of Gaines School and Lexington. In terms of T3s, we've got the shopping plaza where Walmart is out on the east side. And then corridors, we had, the continuation of Lexington, College Station Road, and then Barnett Shoals going out there. On this map, we're, in case of a few reference points, and sorry, we do have two rural nodes. I apologize. On the last one would be Norwood, this yellow dot that's faded in there, and then Whitehall and South Milledge. Wow, geez. There we go. Thank you, sir. We've also shown UGA on here, UGA being a big player in the community. We've talked a little bit about, things that they might be able to pick up in this process. We don't have a lot of control over that, but we'd like to continue that conversation. And as we're talking 20 years out, who knows what kind of cooperation we might be able to get out of them. So that's a real brief, quick go through a lot of the spots we were looking at. We've got them all listed out here. I'm not going to go through them again. But again, this is more for if you all wanted us to have this presentation sent out to you, or if we're publishing this presentation online. Keep in mind these, I'll just go back to the map for a second. These areas are, fuzzy edged because we're not talking about parcel specificity at this level. We will be getting into that a little bit more at the future land use. These are the areas where we see some of these could change a little bit over time. We recognize that. But from infrastructure standpoint, from some of the growth we've seen at these, from some of the commercial centers, from the transit map, these are the areas and corridors that we see that should get a lot of the attention and a lot of the folks going through there. So I believe these last few slides are simply just going over a little bit piece by piece of those parts. And then lastly, we wanted to open up for discussion and questions about that. We're hoping to sort of focus on a lot of those guiding principles because we think those are really important, but we would love to take any questions and discussion from them. And I'll sit down and we can just sort of talk if that works.
Could you pull the guiding principles back up?
Yeah, they're on 3 different slides.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I'll pull them up. I'll start at the beginning and we can flip through them if you guys want to. Hold on. So.
We take public comment, okay.
Please.
And I guess this is not a for or against, but would anyone like to address the planning commission on the proposed growth concept map? Okay, seeing no one approach the podium, we will come behind the rail for discussion. Who'd like to kick us off? Okay, go ahead.
I think this is a great start. I love the guiding principles. I think it's just the direction we should be going. Yeah, obviously I have many, many thoughts as usual, but, and especially the focus on nodes, I think is great. I think this is I think a lot of us are aware of good planning principles and, but making the case for the public and decision makers is of course going to be a different story. I don't know if I want to get too constructive yet, but I think it would be great to show pictures of some of the like what the different transect zones look like in the Athens context. And the other thing, well, I'll save it for now, but I totally agree with all the guiding principles and I'm so glad you've identified them.
Next. I see Sarah's like, don't have to go next, but yes, pretty much. So you're on.
I agree with everything Katie said, and like this is pretty impressive. The principles are great. I think that the image that you included in the presentation that showed the sort of corridor, the sort of pre and post, if you can go that one, that's super impactful. I think there are people who think that they are against what's going on the right, and if they saw that, they would feel differently. So I think anytime, I'd sort of add to what Katie said, like, I think what would be impactful when it gets to the point where you need people to sort of agree with this and adopt it is imagery like that associated with some key nodes probably would be pretty useful, I think, from the standpoint of public buy-in, because I have a hard time, I don't know, I mean, people surprise me all the time, but I just feel like so much now I'm hearing people talk about just not feeling safe walking, not feeling like they have a lot of non-car options to get around. So anyway, I think this is really great. I think this is great. I think that when it comes to the key, the legend on the slides was way more like legible than the legend on this map because it had like the bigger,
Yeah.
I think it had to do with probably how like when this got created, maybe the fonts shrunk. And
Yeah,
the
this map's,
image.
yeah.
Yeah, and so I would just say like in terms of legibility, just to kind of like whenever it gets to that point that even maybe some labels like I went through when you're talking and kind of wrote this down because despite having a pretty good understanding of the geography of the county, I still sometimes don't quite see it until like that. So it might be just maybe not necessarily, you know, anytime that you're being more explicit, I think with the public in terms of clear maps and clear, you know, at some point there'll be, if you're going to keep, if this concept, if the transit concept is going to be on this growth map, then it can't exist without a definition of those, right? Like if any member of the public looked at this and it says T3, T4, they would be like, I have no idea what that is. So I think just making sure to either somehow have that, just even if it's like a title for what T3 means. So maybe, I can't remember in the transect. Yeah, I guess they do sort of, in the Cincinnati example, they give, you know, T3 is a suburban zone, but anyway, that just probably needs to be more explicit, but I think
We're working on a written report to go with this that will be.
explain it all.
Yeah, a little bit better, but yeah, I totally understand your point. I appreciate it.
I think it's great. I love the principles. I think they're great.
I have a question. I'm not, so the T3 zones that are identified on this map. What does it, what does it mean to be identified as a T3 zone on the growth concept map? It is a suburban zone that, I guess, what does it mean to be identified like that?
Yeah, I mean, so the base of this is the green on the outside, the rural. What appears to be gray stepping in from that, yellow that's mostly inside the loop, and then what you can actually see underneath downtown, there's a downtown underneath that's underneath the redness there. So that's where we were sort of identifying the existing conditions, with mostly that gray area being equivalent to T3, which is definitely a suburban feel. So when we were doing the nodes, we were sort of thinking about them in that level of intensity. We would like them to be obviously more compact and more clustered where the node is. But in terms of an intensity standpoint, that's what we were going with by naming those nodes. So I would think something close to parts of like Ansonboro is a little bit closer, like on the edge of T3 to T4. It's got that suburban around it. But it does have, it could be, if Ansonboro was, I'm just trying to think, out where Willowwood Shopping Center is, or out where Athens on the east side is, it would be its own little anchor, and then it would probably dissipate out from there a little bit more. Our T3 zones on here are a little bit less intense. We also talked about the idea that the T3 nodes on here are probably a little bit more of a T3 plus. So it's not going to be that that building height that, the potential for, if there was a revolutionary design at the East Side Kroger, that would probably include multifamily, whether that's like podium multifamily up to, 4 to 6 stories. A T3 plus node is probably, much more on that 2 to 3 story scale, but might have some of that intensity built into it a little bit more, just scale wise is a little bit further down.
Those transects, all of them are to some extent looking back and looking at existing conditions. And then each one will have some level of expectation moving forward, like a baseline. Because one of our points was that there will be growth broadly distributed. If you were in a T4 versus a T3, there would be a different expectation for growth. And then there's these specific nodes and corridors that might get some extra special attention, resources, those kinds of things. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
And so is the sewer line that's on here current? Or is there anything in the sewer that is representing growth? Is it the same? Is the idea we're keeping our sewer?
The red outline is a GIS tool used to basically make that current growth. It's a little bit of an imperfect science. Some of those holes on there are a slightly different. But we are not talking right now, and we had a meeting with Public Utilities this week. They're focused on fixing everything inside this area already. And so that's what we're really talking about. And that's what we talk about when we talk about a planning commission cases, is making sure that everything on the interior is up and running so that we can build off of that capacity where everything funnels through before we ever expand out. So yeah, we're not showing any sewer growth on this map.
Yeah.
We recognize that
public input.
the basins the 3 basins we show on here, 2 of them having much more potential, that being Turkey Creek and Shoal Creek. Turkey Creek being out towards Space Kroger, Shoal Creek, the one going out towards Winterville. Those, we've talked with Public Utilities and they've told us that's probably some of our best potential if we are going to expand sewer, and that sewer expansion can be done in a way that's a little bit more adding to the system as opposed to just extending for one subdivision or one area of town. So we're kind of showing that concept, but to be perfectly honest, we don't know how quickly that can happen. I mean, we're talking, if you talk to Public Utilities about McNutt's Creek, that's still quite a ways out in the future. and we've seen planning commission cases for that, and we have commercial out in that area that would be good areas to add residential to if we can build that up. So we are really talking about building everything up interior first before that expansion goes out. So.
But the one area of expansion, true expansion, would be that Sandy Creek Basin, where we know we have really an issue to be dealt with aging septic tanks on lots that are too small to ever really do a proper repair of a septic field lot by lot by lot. And so we feel it's our responsibility while we're having this discussion to raise that question. And it's been raised before, but we're going to bring it up again and have a public discussion about whether sewer would be included in the capital improvement program for that area. What's interesting now versus the discussion that was held a few years ago about going into that area is, as part of the figuring out on how to support the amphitheater development infrastructure wise, we now have a crossing pathway that's been thought through. There's now, there are still issues with it to be overcome, but there's been attention given to that. Whereas when we talked about this before, it was just a concept. We didn't really have any engineering effort put into it. That's changed.
You mean crossing?
You're saying crossing the creek?
141?
To cross under the loop
Yeah.
and serve that basin. But that basin, when you look, if you look at an aerial, you can see what we're talking about. Very small lots, all served by septic.
I was part of that discussion a few years ago.
Yes, you were. Yes, you were. And the issue has only gotten worse.
Yeah.
The clock is ticking further. So it's.
Yeah, it's probably a decade ago.
Yeah.
So I just want to make a couple of quick comments too. First of all, I really want to thank staff for your work on this. This has just been amazing. I did get to participate in a couple of the public input meetings, and I know y'all put a lot of work into those, and I think that and you never know what to expect when you walk into one of those, right? And I thought that the two that I went to were really well managed, and I think really got people to not talk at cross purposes, to actually talk to each other. And so I felt like it was some of the most meaningful public input that I've been involved in. So I really, really want to appreciate y'all, show my appreciation and do more. Yeah, just keep this up. And I think that the principles and the map itself show that this is really, this is really a community process. In terms of just feedback on the presentation, picking up on something that Sarah said about the legends and all that. I don't know if we have the technology, but I would love to be able to have an online version of this with layers, where I could layer over these different things, like maybe start with the initial land budget with the sewer line, and it's just a suggestion.
We have a good PDF of it where you can turn layers on and off, actually.
Yeah, that's exactly, yeah. So I can see like what's here now, what are we proposing for the future, and maybe even, one for T1, one for T2. I also agree that, people out in the audience who are even, interested in this kind of stuff, when I say T1, T2, they're like, I have to look at this to know what it means over here. So I know that'll all get fixed. So I don't have a problem with that. The one other comment that I have is so much of the public input that you got has to do with right-of-way. And that gets us to the old conundrum of planning and transportation and public works working together. And I don't really need staff feedback or response from this. I just want to throw that out as a comment, because I think that, I believe it was either Stephen or Mark made the comment that the work that we do, both planning staff and the planning commission, we're always looking from the edge of the right of way into the private property. But we know, especially with the image that Sarah pointed out, that the right of way is such an important part of how you experience the area. So I do hope that we're thinking about very carefully moving forward how we can bring the work that TP&W does together with what you all are doing. I know this is a long-term growth concept, but we need we need some place where we can understand that right of way and private property do relate to each other and need to have to interact in order to create the kind of feel, the community feel that we're looking for. So that's all I had to say. What else?
Question, the green edge on this map, is that different than the current growth concept map?
Yes.
A little bit, okay.
A little bit. Particularly going up the 29 corridor. And then a few others are sort of just reflecting some of the realities. I think Lantern Walk going out Jefferson River Road used to be green and a little bit more going up Newton Bridge and Jefferson. I think those are the two big areas.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
I guess I'd want to know if there is, planned expansion of kind of our suburban zones, or not. I know a lot of the update was, just kind of matching the reality on the ground to, our green belts. But that does seem like a question, how much, how much of our, greenfield development, is proposed? Is there any?
I mean, I think the simplest answer for a good bit that's going out towards that is that every area getting a little bit of growth. So if we're putting tools or policies or future land use categories in place that allow for some of that incrementalism, just with most of that being platted out neighborhoods, it's a little bit hard. There's a little bit more protection on them. So we have to look at some of those other smaller tools. And then also with some of the nodes, creating that area where you're driving less if you're having to, or using hopefully an alternative means to get to your daily needs, or at least a minimum of your, daily shopping needs and maybe entertainment needs. We don't expect, tremendous job growth at Oak Grove, so to speak, or something like that. But having that commercial center open up out there, providing that opportunity as opposed to someone coming into Homewood or wherever folks shopped going out Jefferson River Road. So some of those connections, that less travel is some of the things we're focusing on. But in terms of growth, it's probably going to be some of those incrementalism tools that might come in with the potential of like Oak Grove changing and putting in some additional multifamily, I guess, out there.
I mean, if you speak of greenfield development, one way to frame it is a collection of tracts or a tract that currently has nothing. But what we're differentiating is we have those parcels in town. Are they served by sewer or are they not? And our focus is going to greenfield developments that have infrastructure and looking at those as opportunities first. So the way this growth concept was put together was to not put a lot of emphasis on expanding sewer inappropriately. And then second of all, not looking at the areas that are unserved as spots for nodal development or high intensity development of any kind. And that is a little bit of change from some of the discussions we've had in the past. When we've looked at this previous growth concept map versions, we've had hamlets or nodes next to our schools, for example, that were kind of on the edge. Cleveland Road Elementary, Winterville, Coyle, looking at those schools as institutional centers for maybe doing some density around it. The challenge is we don't have the infrastructure next door to do the density that we would like to design, that hamlet style. So we've kind of walked that back a little bit. And ultimately, I think we may have some policies that might allow for those things to occur, but they're either going to be dependent on some alternative sanitary sewer, which we don't have policies for. So we don't want to step out into something that we don't have answers for. Or it's going to be some other extension of sewer. We're just not really interested in having that be a policy for how we're going to grow when we have better opportunities inside our existing service area.
That makes sense to me, going on the constraints of the current sewer extent. I think following up on what Alice said, I'd love to see a map of just that, if we knew the areas of town that, we know the sewer capacity on, the parts where there aren't sewer, the parts where we have a lot of septic tanks. Yeah, that could be fun to see.
And maybe this helps clarify, but we didn't take huge chunks of green and turn them into tan.
Okay.
I think there's been some tinkering to reflect what's already built out there. And then there is the green section between Winterville and the airport. That's shaded. It would probably change from green to maybe the T3 if the sewer was out there. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the only section that we've said
That's fair.
we could upgrade it wholesale.
But that's why we looked at those basins. And we've got those sort of areas where we need to give more thought. But we haven't been very aggressive on this map with showing anything happening there beyond, hey, let's have the discussion about sanitary sewer in these areas.
Looking at this map, or maybe you can show us, like, the one thing that I just noticed, and maybe I'm not seeing it right, is that I don't see the part of Gaines School that connects like the Publix corner of Barnett Shoals and Gaines School to Lowe's. And is
Yeah.
that?
I mean, it's
on
definitely a
purpose?
topic, but you can see the airport overlay that's on there. So,
Yeah,
here's Hillsman Middle School. Here's where Cedar Shoals is running into Gaines School there.
yeah.
So currently, and this is one of the things, so we've got quite a few meetings set up with other departments. TPW being one of the first ones on the docket, PUD already this week, going out and talking with the airport authority about whether or not we can get into here. Typically, this section of the airport overlay actually has a little bit more potential. These arms that are on the side here have a little more. It's these spots right at the end of the runway that are a little bit more potential. So we have to get some answers solved on that. I think we definitely want to consider that. The discussion when we were on the Gaines School walk was quite interesting. It was probably split with, oh, we kind of like this. We kind of like how it stops here. We do like what's down here towards Ansonboro and Publix and some of the multifamily that's down that way. So there's a little bit of that fence sitting on there, but we do have to get some airport stuff answered before we can really sort of extend that T4 down there. But we do see that as an option. I mean, you can kind of see it on both sides. So Willow Woods on this side, it ends right here at the school property, and then we pick it back up again. And frankly, this orange I thought was extended over here just a little bit more. That should push across Gaines School a little bit more, but definitely an area we're looking at.
So the pink hash mark ones are schools or parks?
Correct, yeah. That's
Okay.
Cedar Shoals High School and Hillsman and Gaines School.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback. I hope that's helpful for staff. Can't wait to work some more on this next month. So we will now move on to our third agenda item, which is the short-term vacation rentals proposed text amendment. Again, we are not taking any votes tonight, but we do have 3 members who will voluntarily recuse themselves out of an abundance of caution. I don't know if y'all want to say anything about that or just, yeah.
Say anything about that actually, or?
Stated in the opening of the meeting.
Yeah, I think we stated it. It may just be good for the record for each of you to just say that, you're going to recuse yourself.
I'll recuse myself.
And the Sarah Beresford.
Yes. Just out of caution in the event that I have a conflict of interest that influences compensation.
Okay, Alan?
I am recusing myself because I have a potential conflict of interest.
Joey?
I will recuse myself for conflict.
Thank you so much. So we'll begin with the staff report.
Yes. And I'm going to try to go through this in more detail than we normally do, but I'm going to start off just kind of with trying to get a highlight of what the gist of this is, and the gist being that which came out of, I believe it was Government Operations Committee as a recommendation from the early spring with regard to wanting staff to look at putting together a proposal for the regulation. First of all, the identification of and then regulation of short-term rentals, or as we're identifying them, short-term vacation rentals. That was one of the biggest issues, is that, as with many other zoning ordinances and communities, they are silent on the issue of short-term rental. They're not defined. They don't appear in the use chart. First and foremost, that's what we needed to accomplish, was to establish definitions and then place them in appropriate locations. The way we have presented this in draft form is to basically take a two-pronged approach to the regulation of short-term rentals. The first would be, in any district, if you are the primary resident or primary, either the owner or primary resident, either which it has to be your primary residence first, you could apply for a home occupation permit and operate under the regulations of the home occupation ordinance, a short-term rental. And in layman's terms, what that means is, first of all, I've got to live there first, and it's got to be my primary residence. But if I choose to rent it 6 weekends out of the year and get out of town on vacations during football season, I can enjoy that right under the home occupation. There are some special stipulations under this use, and it's not different than, there's a handful of uses in the home occupation section that allows some exceptions to the general standards. We allow dog grooming, for example, as one, but it limits it to the number of animals that can be there at any time. The biggest change, home occupations are normally only allowed to occupy up to 25% of the structure. For the purposes of short-term vacation rental as a home occupation, you could utilize up to 100% of the structure. You can either do it in your primary residence, or you could offer an accessory dwelling, but you can only do one. You can't do both of them. And that is an administrative permit that you would come in and receive if you are a renter of property instead of the owner and occupant, provided that you can obtain written permission from the owner of the property to allow you to utilize it as short-term rental. Then you can receive the home occupation permit as well. That's the same with any other home occupation permit. If you're renting, we have to receive owner permission first to do that. So that's certainly the streamlined version. I think we feel like that's probably a high number of the individuals that are utilizing their properties as home occupations today. And quite frankly, they're the ones that we receive very few complaints on in terms of neighborhood concerns. That gets into the next section. With home occupations, you would come in, administrative permits, you would go pay your occupation tax certificate through the finance department as with any other. But in terms of requirements of internal changes to your residence, the intent first and foremost is it continues to look like your house and you live there. And so that is a fairly straightforward option for anybody in the county to utilize their place of residency for occasional rental to somebody. The next classification is what we're calling short-term vacation rental / commercial. And those are those properties that their primary use is short-term rental. It is designed and intended to operate as a place, as a structure that it is continuous turnover of individuals in and out. Nobody actually lives there on a permanent basis. We're identifying that as a commercial use, and we have identified in the ordinance where one could come in and establish the use of a property as a bed and breakfast, which is permitted use in many of our districts. Those are the districts we targeted that says if you can do a bed and breakfast, you can do a commercial short-term vacation rental. The biggest difference in that and a home occupation version is that's considered a change of use. And so there are established list of requirements that appear in the general regulation section that we've also plugged in. But you would actually, if you were an investment buyer that came in and bought a property in a zone that allowed it, and it's not allowed in single family. Right now, we're listing it as being permitted in the multifamily zones, commercial zones, in some instances, in institutional, as well as employment office and employment industrial. But you would, if you purchased a property for that, with that intent, that it is an investment, it's going to be used on a permanent basis just for turnaround of short-term residency. You would go through plan review, you would change the use of the property, and you would be subject to review, just like any other commercial business, of the requirements set forth not only in the zoning ordinance, but in other ordinances, specifically life safety related and building code issues, to make sure that, I mean, it's basically functioning at that point as a remote. It's not a hotel motel, but the intent of people coming in and out that are not familiar needs to be addressed. And so that's why the regulations that then show up in 9/15/28, I believe, establish those things that you would be required to do as part of our review from a zoning standpoint, in order to change the use of that property from what would more than likely be a single family residence, changing to commercial short-term vacation rental. But it could be a duplex if it's in the right district and you're changing both of them into two side-by-side uses. And so we've set forth there in 9/15/28 a series of requirements that deal with parking. A lot of it deals with the notification of surrounding property owners of local contact information. Oftentimes, these types of short-term rentals are not locally owned. They're owned by LLCs or groups from out of town. And so there's really no local contact for somebody to get in touch with if they're having issues with tenants that are in for a weekend or a week or something. So it sets forth those, it sets forth the requirements that information that needs to be provided to the renters of the property. A lot of that are life safety concerns from a related standpoint, deals with parking, deals with, that's basically the gist of those things. The big other elephant in the room that we're dealing with is we don't have a permanent number yet, but part of the recommendation or the directive given by the Government Operations Committee was to also, in addition to drafting ordinance language for their consideration and y'all's, also to put an RFP out and select a third-party vendor. There's a lot of them out there. This is what they do for a living, is that they track and basically provide lots and lots of data on short-term rentals within communities. And they can tell you, almost on a daily basis, changes in who has listed their property that hadn't listed it last week, where they are, what the ramifications of how they're doing it are. And that's paramount for us to be able to enforce this type of information, one, but even in my mind, more importantly, is with this type of an ordinance, upon adoption and implementation, you've got to be able to make a determination of how many of these are out there operating in your community right now. Because in our opinion, if we feel strongly about it, those are going to be considered legal non-conforming upon adoption because the ordinance was silent on it prior to that point. And those would, that third-party vendor would generate a list and say, here are the number of properties that have advertised on one of the platforms within the last 365 days prior to the adoption of the moratorium that occurred in September. So that's going to lock in this group of users that were doing it last year, and therefore they can continue to do it as long as they remain active or then they don't sell their property. And that's the way it's set up right now, is you would lose legal non-conforming status through the sale of the property. And then depending on if you're an LLC or a sole owner, or if it's in a trust, the ordinance sets forth, what constitutes a sale of property. It could be a percentage if it's an LLC, for example. There would then be an opportunity, that list would be made public, certainly, and posted. And I think we've built in a 6-month window to allow anybody that feels like they too were participating or utilizing property as short-term rental, but for whatever reason didn't make the list. They've got a 6-month period where they could apply for and make their argument to the planning department and demonstrate that in fact we too should be on this list, and here's why. And it's something that I would review. I can consult with our attorney's office if need be, and make a decision whether or not we feel like they legitimately should be on that list or not. And it's with all type of staff actions like we talked about earlier. If they disagree with my decision, it is appealable up the chain. So, and that's one of the big things, but it's, the highlights of that are legal nonconforming, vesting upon adoption of the ordinance for anybody that's been doing it in the last year, and the loss of the vested right now is through sale of property. And that's kind of a high level presentation. It affords two different opportunities. We feel like it provides certainly some protection for people out there. And we've heard lots of stories of individuals who have bought properties. It's their primary residence, but they count on those 4 or 5 weekends a year to offset their mortgage. Or if they've got an accessory structure, they can utilize that as a short-term rental. We live in the main house. We offer the guest cottage in the back as a STVR, and it helps us pay mortgage or pay our taxes. And we're trying to allow that to continue to occur with a very straightforward administrative permit process through the home occupation. Anything other than that, we really are looking at it as a commercial use and feel like it should go through the same process that any other commercial operation goes through.
Thank you. That was a very good summary. We'll take some time out for public comment first. Is there anyone here who would like to speak to address the planning commission? I won't even ask for pro and con because we're just discussing now. So anyone who'd like to address the planning commission on the short-term vacation rental text amendment. Yes, please come to the podium. Just state your name and where you live.
Oh, I'm Marilyn Vickers. I live at 197 Witherspoon Court, which is in the Glenwood neighborhood. I came to this concern about what I have until tonight heard just as short-term rentals, but I hear your language of short-term vacational rentals because in June, I found out that the home next to me in a single-family dwelling, RS 25 zone, was going to be a VRBO. It caused me to begin to act and to get in touch with my commissioner and to move forward with how we might be able to sort this out. I really come here tonight mostly with questions, and I have had some of those answered a bit because the first meeting I went to in September, I heard that really the only objection to having some limits placed on these vacation rentals was that there were homeowners who used their homes or part of their homes or whatever in that manner. And I was always in agreement with that because people who do that are part of the community. They send their kids to the schools, they support the businesses. Their workplaces are usually in Athens-Clarke County. These are people who live here. They're the citizens, the taxpayers, the voters of Clarke County. What I was concerned about is that there are an increasing number of what I now term investment buyers who are taking residences and buying them up at a much inflated price, by the way, at least that was what happened next door to me, so that it changes the whole character of the neighborhood in many ways. One, it can price out middle-income families who formerly lived there. Two, you have no neighbor next door. You have no one to turn to. And I hear that you're going to try to address some of those concerns under the commercial commercial designation. So I am very glad to hear of what you're trying to do. And of course, the reporting is the biggest first concern, I think. Until we know how big the problem is, it's going to be awfully hard to track down these people and to get them to pay the appropriate taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else who would like to address the planning commission on short-term vacation rentals? Okay, well, great. Hearing none, we'll come behind our shrunken rail here. Who'd like to start us off? Attorney Gary.
Huh?
Attorney Gary.
So this, I know that this is gonna be a question that comes up. I hear you say you feel very strongly about the vesting of the legal non-conforming status. What's the basis for that strong opinion? Like, why can't we just like go in and say like, no, you can't do this anymore to people?
I mean, what we have seen over the course of the last several years in Georgia are communities that have tried to do that. And they've taken the position that because it is not an identified permitted use within your zoning ordinance, therefore you cannot do it. And so we're going to basically zone them out of certain areas. And if you're currently operating one there, you've got to cease doing it because we never listed it as a permitted use. I think almost without exception, all of those that have gone through the legal system, the ruling has been awarded to the property owner based on the fact that if the municipality did not recognize it or identify it, there are property rights that he had or she had to do that. And in almost every case that I'm aware of, the county or the municipality has lost. And we feel like certainly the same thing would happen here if we tried to do that.
So the state of Georgia, like we have precedent case law that says like, this is how you have to do it, basically.
Yes, Georgia has a very strong vested rights case law. So that's always something that we have to think about when we're talking about uses and restricting uses or taking away uses.
Yeah.
In certain zoning districts.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. It's definitely something that I wanted to bring up now, and I'll probably bring it up again and ask the exact same question the next meeting we have, because I can just already hear people saying, well, what about New York? New York did it this way. Why can't we do it? Why doesn't it work? You know, and it's like, it's law that's on the books. You talk about amending the state constitution if that's how you want to do it. But that makes a lot of sense.
I think there may have been other avenues where instead of a use, it's like everyone just has to register as soon as the ordinance is passed. Is that something you looked into, or is that, I know we're kind of in the realm of zoning versus I think Atlanta was talking about having every short-term rental operator apply for a like having to register with the city as soon as the ordinance was passed.
Yeah, and I think our position on it was that, and I think we did something similar to that 20 years ago when we eliminated the RG zones and there was registration involved. I think we feel like at this point with the utilization of the third-party vendor who will be able to establish that list, that it's the better approach to publish that list, say, here's who we know already. Has operated in the last year, and therefore they're deemed to be on this list of legal non-conforming uses, but then giving anybody else that doesn't appear on it the ability to register. Same with home occupations. I mean, somebody that is doing it in a manner that would qualify for a home occupation today in a single family zone is still going to show up first on that legal non-conforming list. They could take themselves off of it by simply coming down, applying for a home occupation and moving forward that way if they chose to. But our guess is there are, and we don't know this for sure, but we're estimating that when that list is published, there will probably be 700 or 800 properties that will appear on that based on just some preliminary information we've received in terms of people that have utilized some facet of their property over the last 12 months for this type of use. And honestly, from a staff resources and workforce effort, the creation and establishment of the list versus us processing 700 or 800 applications is.
Understand. I guess my concern is just incentivizing keeping, short-term rentals going versus, opening up, long-term housing units to people who might need them. And also just, I think one of the purposes I would suggest, for a short-term rental regulation is to try to keep, more of the revenue in the county. And to maybe to homeowners or smaller enterprises versus, big LLCs that from who knows where. I don't know if there's a way to incentivize that.
I think that's the key word, incentive. I think we're really limited on, what we can do at this, zoning level to. I mean, I feel like this ordinance has gone just about as far as he possibly can to do exactly that. I mean, Brad pointed out in his presentation that the short-term rentals in neighborhoods that are already owner-occupied houses are not the ones where we get the big complaints. But it's much harder to prevent that, that kind of activity in the commercial zones, and certainly controlling who can actually use the property that way. I mean, I would feel much better if, Commissioner Goodrum bought a house and, in the commercial zone or the employment zone. But I can't, I don't know if there's any way we can create those incentives. We certainly can't mandate it.
A couple things you may see change just from staff discussion over the last 48 hours. Before this comes back to you. So I'll tell you what we're thinking, because I'd like to get the benefit of y'all's thoughts on it too. We did not, and we discussed it, it just didn't make it into this draft. We did not place a limit on occupancy in conjunction with home occupations, and we think that may be something worth considering. It may be that it's, that you're allowed no more than 2 occupants per bedroom as part of a home occupation, and then put a cap on it at maybe 6 or 8 people total. So if you're going to operate it as in a neighborhood as a home occupation, if you got a 4-bedroom house, you can't have more than 8 residents living there. And that would be made to be noted on their home application permit. Need to talk through that a little bit further, because I'm not sure what that magic maximum number would be, if it's 6 or 8 or. But 6 gets into a little less on the parking too, so.
But you already got the ordinance, the draft ordinance that parking has to be provided off street.
Got to be provided off street, and
To me, that would have its own natural way of limiting. I mean, I've not recently, but in past years, I've had like big family, friends, everybody, Thanksgiving dinners, and people are staying in my house and staying in my neighbors' houses, and there are definitely more than 8 people in my house during those times, but so I'm trying to think in terms of that's a once a year friends and family kind of thing, different from the commercial transaction of an Airbnb. But I'd like to hear y'all think through that a little bit more before.
we've seen, just in going through some of the Airbnb listings, a lot of these older houses in the in-town neighborhoods will list that it sleeps 12 or it sleeps 14.
Technically, mine would. Yeah, I mean, I know. And of course, as a person who's rented some Airbnbs around the country, never for that many people, but I'm always like, really? You thought this slept 8? We're squeezing in with 4,
So, we will have more conversations on that. I like the premise of putting a restriction on it. I want to, as with everything else we've said, want to make sure we're in safe legal grounds with whatever we recommend. So that was one of them. And then the other thing that we have considered, because it is a little bit marginal in my opinion, for commercial short-term rentals, it's just, you cannot do it in single family zones. Right now, we've got it listed as a permitted use in RM. It may be appropriate for some more consideration that those multifamily zones or a special use permit instead of just permitted by right.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
I put that in my notes.
Yeah.
But those are the two things right now that we've looked at that we'll have more conversations internally with.
So if I could just bring this way down to the layperson's level for a minute. It sounds like if this draft, however amended, if we recommend it for approval and it gets approved, life doesn't really change for people that are currently renting.
That's correct.
So even if I've got, let's say I have a house in Normaltown and I rent it out, let's say, it typically is rented by visiting professors. So I rent it out for like 3 months at a time, as opposed to long weekend. Theoretically, I would show up on that list and I could continue to operate that as a legal non-conforming.
Wouldn't be short-term if you.
Yeah, that's what I'm questioning because I just know that's.
Show up on the list probably because they're like just looking for.
Yeah, look, I posted on Airbnb, but the person will Airbnb it for 3 months as opposed to, 2 weeks.
I mean, I think you would probably show up on the list, and then if your management of that property was of a style that you never rented to anybody for less than 30 days,
Mhm.
And you wanted to make that argument that you shouldn't be on the list. But if during
Then it's a long-term rental.
but if during the course of the last 12 months, if one time you rented it to somebody for 2 weeks, you're on the list.
And what would be the consequences for? I guess you'd have to, for being on the list, I guess. If you didn't.
I don't know that there.
No obligation, it's just.
Right, you would just be
You'd be legal non-conforming.
You would be on the list, and then we would receive a recommendation at the end of the 12 months following adoption from the vendor that we're contracting with. At least that's what we anticipate now, that they're going to give us a list the day of adoption. And then 12 months later, they're going to give us another list and say, here are 14 properties that never listed during the last 12 months on any of these platforms. And those 14 properties would then receive a letter from us saying that you're no longer on the list. You've lost your non-conforming status due to inactivity per the language in the ordinance.
And this is just for commercial.
That's just for the commercial. Well, it's for the home occupation too. But I mean, it's much simpler because if you're operating it and meet the criteria for home occupation, you just have to come get a new permit and go back through the process if you still meet it legally. And you still live there, you haven't moved out, and you still want to rent it occasionally throughout the year and get out of town on busy weekends, you would just have to apply for a new permit.
So I'm sorry. Are you done?
But I guess
Question.
I hate to burden people who really are just, living in their own house and renting out a room once in a while. But I guess the permit process isn't that onerous.
10 minutes.
Okay.
To address a scenario that our citizen input speaker gave, the house next door to her that is apparently being bought for the purpose of being used as a year-round VRBO. We may not be able to help her if that turns out to be legal non-conforming, or not. I mean, obviously this ordinance makes it impossible for you to do that in the future. You wouldn't buy a house next door to an RS-15 or RS-25 or whatever, because you can't. You have to live there. If they're doing short-term vacation rentals, they'll probably show up on the list and will get legal non-conforming status.
If that property listed or rented prior to, I believe it was the 19th of September was the adoption of the moratorium, they're going to be on the list and they will be allowed to continue as the ordinance is currently written until such time that they sell that property.
And if it's an LLC, if there's like 30% change in ownership.
Or if they discontinued for a period of 12 months or whatever reason and didn't use it, they would lose it. Or if there was a change in, I think it's 30% of the ownership of the LLC.
That's right.
And those would all be things that we would be relying on our vendor to. That's what the contract pays them to do, is that type of data mining to provide information to us.
That vendor would be like a one-time thing, right? Like they wouldn't,
No, it would be an ongoing service provided.
just for in perpetuity.
Yeah.
To pick up on situations like this where maybe the house on Witherspoon changes ownership, and then we can come in and say, you're now illegal.
And they provide us
How much?
the ability they provide us with the information that gives us the ability to enforce issues that are going on. And other communities that have utilized these vendors have also expressed that those vendors' ability to identify and point out all of the active users within your community, therefore requiring the assurance that they're paying the hotel motel tax, is what certainly assists, if not generates more than the cost of the annual contract with the vendor.
Is it just for people doing that for the yearly or just month to month? Or
You would, if from a standpoint, the definition of the short term is if you rent it to somebody for less than 30 days. So if you're going to be out of town for a couple of weeks in the summer and you want to rent your property, you can go on Airbnb and list your property and they'll rent it for you. And there's lots of those platforms out there, and that's where they're finding the information and providing us with that list of active properties within the year. So even if you did it one time in the prior year, you would be on the list. If you went a year after that and never did it, then you get removed from the list.
And in this case, being on the list is a good thing.
Yeah.
Usually it sounds like it's bad, but whose list am I on?
But in the case of what I hope is going to be the vast majority of our residents that are doing this, it's going to be the home occupation route is the way to make yourself legal. And that's an administrative permit that you come down and fill out, and it's very quick.
Do you renew it every year?
You don't have to, not for a home occupation.
But it is, as the ordinance is currently written, even with a home occupation, if you don't utilize it as a STVR for 12 months, you'd lose the right to do it till you came back in and reapplied.
You get a letter from us telling you that your home occupation permit has expired per the ordinance based on lack of activity, and you have to do it again.
So a question about enforcement. First part of the question is on section 91528A5. So these are standards that apply to all commercial short-term vacation rentals. And it says there shall be a maximum of 1 car per bedroom plus 2 additional spaces for management and or guest parking. First, I'm a little bit confused by the switch between 1 car per bedroom plus 2 spaces for management or guest parking. Like, is it saying that there's a maximum of 1 parking space per bedroom? It's a maximum of the number of cars you can bring, but also you can't park them on the street. It looks like, so I think that part 1 is that I don't know that this makes sense currently as written. Part 2 is, so I know that we're saying that these, we're grandfathering in legal non-conforming use, but does that also apply to the standards? Like if you've got a commercial short-term rental in the Hancock region where you got, no parking spaces, only on-street parking, can you still operate as a commercial short-term rental? Because then you are perpetually in violation of the standards, which the other standards I'm assuming are going to apply to these grandfathered in commercial short-term rentals. Like even if you are doing it legal non-conforming, you still have to post emergency contact information now that we're applying this, right? And And so I don't know that there is an answer to that right now. If there is, I'm interested, but
If you're on the list, you're legal non-conforming, you're not required to adhere to any of these standards.
oh, to none of them.
No,
Okay.
that's what makes you non-conforming.
Okay, interesting. And then my, is violation of any of these standards, would it be legally possible, has this been litigated, for a legal non-conforming use to be null and void for failure to, adhere to other standards, like the hotel motel tax, other code and violations? If someone's breaking the law in other ways with their commercial short-term vacation rental, is it possible to get that legal non-conforming use voided? I don't think it's possible under this as written, but would that be a possible amendment?
Not sure how we do it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way to do that. So for instance, on just for the tax instance, which I know that's something that people are interested in, is what I still call the OTC tax. I was involved a long time ago with all the litigation against hotels.com and all them back in the day. But, and so I still call them the OTCs from that, but, I think it would be, just thinking through it, I think it would be tough to justify from a constitutional perspective, maybe taking away a legal non-conforming. And I'm saying this kind of spontaneously. I think it would be difficult to take away a legal non-conforming if, for instance, they didn't pay the tax, partially because really that's the way that it's currently set up. It's on Airbnb and VRBO and those other companies to make sure they're remitting it to the
Oh, yeah.
to the county or the city. In terms of complying with other things, I'd have to think through that a little bit, but just initially, because of the way that property rights work in Georgia, I think we'd have to be careful about that, thinking about that if we're pulling away a use from somebody just because they happen to have non-compliance with one thing. I mean, usually the way that we handle that is as a code enforcement matter, right?
Yeah.
So, but certainly something we can think about a little bit more internally, see if we can come up with something. But just offhand, I don't know if there's much that we could do. But I think I'm glad you asked the question.
But the home occupation permit, is that something that can be revoked for code enforcement violations? Or for various code, you can't.
But the ordinance right now currently is not set up where it would revoke for.
So there's no way to revoke a home occupation license.
If you don't perform in line with the home occupation that's been issued, then that is the enforcement issue on where you've stepped out of bounds.
Mhm.
So in the case of a beauty salon where we allow one chair, if you suddenly have 4 chairs show up, we have a violation.
Mhm.
And it's based off of something measurable from the home occupation permit that was issued to you that said, these are the terms by which you operate. You're not following them.
Mhm.
So if we have a legal non-conforming one, we have no home occupation paperwork.
Oh, yeah. That with the home occupation, I was jumping from the.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. That was on me.
And even in that example,
Bopping around.
with 4 chairs instead of 1, the recourse would be they may get a citation and they're told to take 3 of their chairs out.
It'd be a warning.
We're not going to come in and say, we've stripped you from your home occupation and because you're not in compliance and you're not allowed to apply for another one or correct the situation.
Mhm.
And I think as a minimum, you'd have to, if that were something we were to even consider, there'd have to be due process involved with that. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
If the home occupation doesn't expire, you've got to give them some due process on that. So.
That all makes sense. That all makes sense, but I still think 9, 28, 25 is a little confusing.
No, I agree. And if we're going to use spaces in one part of the sentence, we need to use them in another at a minimum. So it would be 1 parking space per bedroom plus 2 additional.
And that would have just because that I think having that in there would have the impact of, or it could have the impact of preventing, even in RM zones, a commercial short-term vacation rental from operating from a house that does not have on-space parking.
Without variant, I mean, it would be something you could ask for a variance on.
Yeah.
You're going to be dealing with lot coverage issues as to whether or not in an RM zone, you can actually pave or put in enough spaces and stay under your coverage. You know, if we go to special use, it would afford that person as part of the special use process, the ability to request a variance. Then it would put them into a binding plan and more standards that we could utilize for enforcement.
So we're considering the possibility of allowing them in RM zones under special use.
More I think about that, the more I like it. I think it offers a nut, because, I mean, what we're saying is this type of use is a commercial use. And there are a lot of multifamily, I mean, it allows some very limited commercial use, like office or small laundry, but.
Not unlike RS zones, really.
But I think it affords a little higher level of assurance that the establishment of one of these in an RM district is providing protection to adjacent property owners, especially if it's one of our residential neighborhoods that's multifamily.
Yes. Any other questions?
I have a question. Could a HOA set limits on? Could they set limits for how they're used or?
I mean, if an HOA, if they had established covenants within a neighborhood that addressed it, and they, to the extent that the HOA is willing to enforce it, they could, but it's
They could
not,
have strong, they could have stricter.
they could have stricter, but
Yeah,
if their covenants say no home occupation type Airbnbs in our neighborhood, and the HOA president comes to us and says, I want you to go enforce this, we can't enforce that. We can only enforce what's in our ordinance. They would have to be willing to take action against the property owner. I guess that would be more of a civil matter that they would deal with, but it would not be incumbent on the government to enforce it.
Good question.
I wanted to clarify the home occupation limitations, the 25% of the dwelling and only one structure at a given time. Is that's the limit?
That's generally the limit for most home occupations, but this one's exempted that.
Oh,
When you get down to it, it says you can use all of the structure if it's your primary and or an accessory. The limitation there is I can't live in my house. I've got a guest cottage in the backyard. I get out of town on a football weekend and I rent it to two different groups of people, one in the house and one in the ADU. You can only do one.
All right, that seems to be negotiable to me, but I guess it's good to have someone keeping an eye on the place.
And it's up to the, I mean, you can certainly, and a lot of people do it, you know, rent a basement or they rent an extra bedroom through Airbnb. They would do that as a home occupation as well.
Anything else? Okay, well, thank you very much. This has been a long time coming and looking forward to seeing what the final outcome is. Appreciate all staff's work. So that's the end of our new business. What we have left is Planning Commission Chair's report. Our Planning Commission Chair is not here tonight and the Vice Chair has no report except to wish everyone a great holiday season. Forward. Planning Director's report.
The director was absent and Bruce filled in swimmingly at Tuesday night at a tough meeting, and
I noticed that.
he will give you the report.
I won't take the same amount of time.
Yeah, I was hoping to get home to feed my dog before.
Yeah, before tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we had a handful of items. It was not a short list. So under the new business items that went forward, the first one that the Mayor Commission heard was the Micah's Creek development. And it was approved with conditions unanimously. The second item was the Peach Street request for a halfway house. And even though this is going through the process at the state level, they still had the hearing, which they needed to have, but there was no action taken. But there was a considerable amount of comment. And if you haven't watched the meeting, I would encourage you to maybe watch and hear the comment that was given at that time and some of the mayor and commission discussion that occurred afterward. I think you'll find some of it was very consistent to what you had at your meeting. But that occurred and there was no action taken. The third item of new business was for 120 West Cloverhurst regarding the special use for the legal non-conforming duplex expansion. And ultimately, the expansion of the legal non-conforming use was denied. I want to be real clear about what that means, though. And it's not real clear if you watch the meeting because we never really landed on the if-then statement of if denied, then what. The construction that was approved by the HPC can still occur. So the discussion was about the use of the structure. It wasn't about the structure itself. And we tried every opportunity we were given to kind of explain the difference between use and structure. The opportunity is still there for that property owner to build the garage and to build the connection. What can't occur is for there to be any living space in that new construction that expands the duplex. So that is something that staff is going to have to follow up on and make, if it is built, it'll make that inspection that much more specific to make sure that we don't have livable area that would constitute an expansion of the duplex. So we'll see. We also have something scheduled to talk to the applicant's representation about next steps. So if there's something more about that, I can let you guys know. We had 3 text amendments. All 3 passed unanimously. The 3 were the administrative waivers text amendment that we put in place to respond to some of the changes at the state level with regard to right-of-way GDOT projects. Allowing single-family residences in the airport overlay, we had a Scrivener's error that needed to be buffed out. That was approved. And then the other text amendment was about the distribution centers, how to build that into the land use code, how to build that into zoning code and have it as a use type, change our definitions. There was a lot of work in that. That was approved unanimously as well. Then we had 2 items of old business and 2 of ours, but it really generated 3 items. The first was Newton Bridge Road with the approval of a pump station to serve it. And then the second was the actual vote about the development itself. After considerable discussion, the pump station was approved 7-2. Then the discussion rolled into the development. It ultimately was approved 8-1. And then the third item that we had was the Bray Street development. And that was approved unanimously. That was it. I got to leave after that.
And your dog, I hope there's somebody else home to feed
There
you.
was.
Okay, well, does anyone have any miscellaneous announcements? I will accept a motion to adjourn. Oh, did you have
We
this
a
one?
quorum.
Oh, that's right, we can't. So, are we officially in session until next month? Guys, no ex parte discussions between. So I don't even I can't even say meeting adjourned. Just say, bye, y'all. Have a good Christmas and happy Hanukkah.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Thank you all.